This is the lecture portion for Do the Right Thing, New York and Race. So the first issue here is how to respond to racism, hatred, and prejudice. I'm going to use three sources here. This one is from W.E.B. Du Bois of Our Spiritual Strivings, and he's arguing that his response is going to be to try to beat white at every particular activity, or he could just fall into a silent hatred and distrust everything white. Martin Luther King Jr. picks up on this same response in his letter from a Birmingham jail. He says that some Negroes will have adjusted to segregation, some will have become insensitive, and then there's another group, the Black nationalist group, that is going to become bitter and have a hatred. So he's very similar to what Du Bois is talking about in his piece. Malcolm X would respond to this same particular issue here, and his solution was complete separation. And I guess that's some of that hatred and anger, or possibly just a belief that whites and blacks would not be able to integrate. We're going to transition to some historiography in New York City in the 1980s. You want to think about The Dream Deferred by Langston Hughes, as he mentions here. Or Does It Explode? That's going to be one of the themes as you watch this particular piece, as the characters become frustrated with various issues that seem to occur throughout the film. Michael Stewart was a graffiti artist, and this individual was killed following an arrest by the New York City Transit Police for spray painting graffiti. Bernie Goetz was a individual who had been robbed prior by African Americans, and he's going to earn the nickname Subway Vigilante by responding to a attack by shooting the perpetrators. This led to a news story that became national news. Here we have some of the outcome of some of the people he wound up shooting. Yusef Hawkins, a 16-year-old who was shot to death in 1989. Now, the reason why these individuals are significant in the film is because at the end in the riot scene, you do hear some of the chants to Yusef Hawkins, Howard Beach. Here we have the perpetrators convicted of second-degree murder, and this individual was acquitted. Another New York issue is Howard Beach, 1986. This one involved Michael Griffith, who was killed by a car while he was running from a mob of white males as they chanted racial slurs for this individual being in the wrong neighborhood. Additional national news stories, not from New York. We have the beating of Rodney King. We have the murder of Latasha Harlins in 91. And then I've included some reaction videos because the reaction videos are very telling about the racial climate in the United States as these issues tend to emerge. We're going to start off here with prompt 1. For prompt 1, you have to have an understanding of the sympathetic racist as you complete the reading by Dan Flory. And that sympathetic racist is crucial to understanding the point that the author is trying to bring up. You want to use the character sheet. You are asked to determine the level of racism according to you for each of these particular characters, and I've included an excerpt here. Which character did you identify with and why? So the first one we're going to look at are Sal, Pino, and Vito. And when I look at these individuals, I would say this individual is high as far as racial views. This one, conditional. And this one seems to be very low throughout the film. So the sympathetic racist, ultimately what the author is arguing is for white viewers, when they watch Do the Right Thing, they have to identify with one of the white characters. And so for the most part, if they're going to identify with Pino, then what does that say about their racial views? And the author is arguing that they tend to focus more with Sal, and they go through the film coming up with reasoning as to some of the comments that he makes, but there clearly is a breaking point at the end of the film when Sal uses the N-word and breaks Radio Raheem's radio. And that right there could be the turning point. So as a white viewer, you're watching the film and you're, okay, well, he said that, I'll give him a pass. Okay, he said this, I'm going to give him a pass. And then you get to the end and he drops that N-word, tells Radio Raheem to go back to Africa, and then the viewer seems to be analyzing themselves at that point. Would they be willing to drop the N-word or act like Sal? Have they just turned into a Pino? Or were they always a Vito? That seems to be the issue with the sympathetic racist. As a white viewer, you have to sympathize with one of these characters, and as the characters change throughout the film, you tend to analyze your own racial views. That's ultimately what the author is arguing. The question here for Sal, is he racist or not? Is it the world that makes him racist? Do you identify or relate to Sal? There's a scene in the film, Pino's view on the N-word and people. It's kind of self-explanatory. How did you feel when watching the film? It's kind of going back to that sympathetic racist. How did the film address history by making references to the past through characters? So as you're watching the film, we could take a character like Bugging Out and Radio Raheem. These two individuals seem to be more on the right. They're more of the black nationalists, the angry individuals. Maybe they're just people looking for you to respect them, and they're going to treat you in the same way in which you treat them. So who do they represent historically? As we think about that question, we want to think about the tale of two 60s. We've addressed that in the early 60s. Things were happy with regard to protests, but as the 60s gets violent, people tended to get angry and join some of those extreme groups like the Black Panther Party, the Nation of Islam, and so on. Prompt 2. For prompt 2, what you have to do is make a connection between the characters in the film and the readings. Spiritual Striving, Letter of a Birmingham Jail, or the Black Revolution. I've included some excerpts here, and the excerpts are pretty much about how you are going to respond, which is why we started out with that task. How do you respond to racism and prejudice? For Du Bois, he's saying that you could mock or distrust everything white. King is recognizing that as well, as he mentions it down here, that some people are going to respond to segregation with bitterness and hatred. And for Malcolm, it was just pretty much arguing separation, definitely a different viewpoint. So what you have to do here is look at the characters and figure out which one would you identify with. Does Bugging Out have a valid point, saying, he wants his brothers on the wall? Mookie, who doesn't seem to really take a stance on any of the issues earlier in the film, as well as the teens, who really have no issue with Sal because they view Sal as somebody who is feeding them. Additional discussion. One of the issues that come up is the issue of Bugging Out's requests about putting brothers on the wall. Throughout the film, they do play the song Fight the Power by Public Enemy. And this line down here, most of my heroes don't appear on no stamps. Think about being black in America before this film, and there is no stamp, there's no money that has any African American heroes or leaders. And what's the message to individuals? Are you a part of the country or not? Bugging Out's argument is you're profiting off the community, and therefore you have an obligation. So if you're not going to recognize us as people, yet you're willing to accept our money, is that a valid point? This is a recap of the Malcolm X Black Revolution speech. Malcolm was arguing that black and white would never be able to integrate because all of the institutions would be controlled by white America. The police force, the person hiring you, the person making a decision about whether or not you get a loan. So Malcolm's argument would be simply, since these institutions are not controlled by us, we still would be under indirect influence and control by white America because they control the institutions. which is why he advocated for separation. In the section here from his Black Revolution speech, he talks about the white man's factory, the white man's business. Integration to him was temporary because these institutions would still place white America in control of black America. Which brings up the question here, how did the brothers eventually get on the wall? And that's the ending, where they do get on the wall, but they get on the wall through violence. Which brings up this question, do black civil rights issues have to end in violence? We have a couple of historic examples here. And once again, we're back to the dream deferred, that explosion that can take place at any particular moment. The escalation of events. Alex Wilson beating from Central High School, Little Rock 9. The LA riots in 1965, where the police pulled over Marquette Frye. The beating of Rodney King, Reginald Denny, and other individuals. This documentary here, Uprising Hip Hop in the LA Riots. Here are some timestamps that will stress some of those points. For example, John Singleton at 5:40 does suggest that there might be an explosion as a result of the verdict of not guilty by the police officers. And then, of course, we have the story of Titus Murphy, who saw Reginald Denny getting beat up and decided that he was going to save this human being's life. So he gathered a couple of friends. They wound up driving to the scene of the crime, and they saved Reginald Denny's life. In that moment, they didn't see him as any sort of racial issue. He was just another human being who, if they did not save, probably would have lost his life. What about the movie ending for BlacKkKlansman? Feel free to look that up. The death of Heather Heyer at Charlottesville. Which brings up the question here, did Mookie do the right thing? Often debated. Sal is outside of the pizzeria with his family, and Mookie takes the can and breaks the window, and the mob winds up going to the store. The question here is, they do set the store on fire, but what would they have done if Mookie didn't do that? So Mookie pretty much starts the target of the store, which might have changed the direction of the mob. What if they were about to violently attack Sal, and instead of violently attacking Sal, they opt to go after the restaurant, which is what they do. So it's a question there that's often debated. Did Mookie do the right thing? At the end of the film, they do have a section with a excerpt from both King and Malcolm X. So the question here is, who was right, and ultimately, what is this film saying about both of these civil rights leaders? How did the brothers get on the wall? This is the photograph that's placed at the end of the film. And if you want to hear some more from Malcolm X in his own words, click these links. Close your question, how would you end the film? And then link to the themes.